Let me just ask, you didn't come from a family of high status, of wealth, of high education. Do you feel like your upbringing was of a higher quality because of your relationship with the church? Do you feel like the church kind of upgraded what otherwise might have not been a great, a great childhood or adolescence?
I think so, yes, because I associated with people that were, educated and stuff. We had some people in the ward in Bern that had university degrees, that I looked up to, that I felt like that's what I want to become. And maybe if I had not had that, where would I have seen exam? I might still have made it. That's hard to know, but I think the church gave me this ambition, or this drive to make more out of myself and
to be good, to be righteous, right?
Yeah.
And even when you were suicidal, it gave you a reason to live.
Exactly. And it gave me something to turn to again.
When you needed comfort, right?
Right. And the mission, in a way, was the best thing for me then. It really helped me heal. I mean, I'd had 2 other boyfriends in the meantime. None of that had helped. It just was always like, that's not how this guy was. And, it just was no help. But going on a mission, it like took the focus away from me and put it out onto serving others. And that really helped.
Yeah. And, for as much as, for those who have left the church or who are struggling with the church, for as much anger and frustration as we might have, if we're being objective and kind of clear-eyed, we have to acknowledge that Mormonism causes pain and suffering for some, but it also does great things for people. It's both. And it's tough sometimes to hold that ambiguity that it does both. It harms and it also heals and helps. That's just a reality that we have to admit if we're going to be honest and objective.
Right. And this is an important thing, because if we just say it's all bad, then we're binary again. Before it was all good and now it's all bad. But actually, it's much more complicated. There's many wonderful things about it. It just, how I look at it now, it just happens to not be true. Right. And but for me, I think I am glad I had it. It also gave my mother something. It gave her support, in a very difficult marriage. My father then was like the last 15 years of his life, he was sick, and she had the church helping, supporting them. And it gave me examples of what good family life looked like, so, and community and friends like this mutual teacher or president or whatever you want to call her, that became a really good friend and still is.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So is the mission next?
Yes, the mission is next. So interesting is that this ex-boyfriend in Spain, we still kept loosely in contact. And just as I had decided to go on a mission, he told me he was now an atheist. So we had gone like in 2 different directions. So yes, I went.
I'm just going to say that for those who experience a faith crisis, who had a adolescent or young adult love that didn't work out in relation to the church for some reason, that is a very common and predictable source of eventual angst and pain and suffering, because no matter who you marry, you're going to experience a lessening of the joy and the fulfillment of that relationship. Then maybe during the courtship years, you're going to have pain and struggle and difficulty. And it's so hard. And we'll get to this, I'm sure, when you go through your faith crisis, but it's so hard when you're going through a tough marriage and a faith crisis to then look back and go, I once had the love of my life and lost it because of the church. It ends up haunting a lot of people.
Right. And you think everything would have been better. And this may be completely wrong, and you even rationally know it's wrong, but emotionally, you know, you feel like, had I not had this faith in this stuff that's now turning out to be not true, you know, I could have had this relationship, you know, and it could have run its course, you know, but then it would have been more natural if it had broken up, you know.
Right.
But yeah, so that continued to haunt me basically for many years. But at first I was on my mission where it didn't haunt me during that time. Yes, and I went to the temple, and it was kind of interesting. My temple, I actually loved it. You know, and I know a lot of people have a hard time the first time, but I loved it. You know, I thought, wow, you know, I didn't understand anything, you know, and it frightened me. I went in 89. No, 87. So I went with the punishments.
You went through when the penalties.
Yes.
And the death and the, you know, oaths and the
everything, yes,
all the barbaric kind of stuff that's been removed,
and also the old way of doing the washings and anointings, and
right, with the poncho that exactly would have the sides open, and
underneath you're naked,
and you'd be touched nakedly. Well, they touch you with oil nakedly, yeah,
right. And the funny thing is, none of that bothered me, you know. The only thing I was worried about was Satan saying, you know, if you don't keep everything here, you know, you're under my power. So I was like, oh no, how do I avoid this? You know,
that guy you tried to kill, he comes back.
Right. He did. And that frightened me, I remember. But other than that, you know, I liked it. I also did not see, well, what did bother me from relatively the beginning is that Eve was silent. You know, that she didn't speak, and she seemed to be sort of just this attachment to Adam. That did bother me from relatively the beginning. And I continued to be more and more upset by this. But at the very first, not so much. So then I went to Ireland on my mission. And I was in the MTC in London, and that is quite a different experience. So this was like 87. Yes, 87, January of 87. And there were like only 32 missionaries there at the MTC, 16 sisters and 16 elders. And we were taught by the mission president and his wife. So that was kind of cool. And there was a guy in the MTC that proposed to me, which was, yeah.
Hey, you're not supposed to be doing that.
I know. And the thing is, you know, the way he did it, it was like on the last day before we were going, and he was telling me that he had seen me in a vision.
Uh-huh.
And he knew that I was supposed to be for him and all this. And like the entire 2 weeks or 3 weeks that we had been there, he had already, you know, shown that he really liked me, and everybody knew it. And it was an embarrassment of no end to me. And yeah, so, and he went to England and I went to Ireland, but he wrote me his entire mission. And, you know, I kept thinking, and this is like one of those things in the church too sometimes, I kept wondering, should I really marry him if he's had a vision? You know, maybe I should, you know, that kind of thing. But anyway, so on my mission, Ireland is very Catholic, obviously, you know, especially the South. In the North, it's not. It was like all one mission, the entire island. So Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Now it's different, I think, but at that time it was one mission. And in the North, there were like many different religions, like there were Methodists and Presbyterians and all these religions that I thought didn't exist anymore. I only knew them from Joseph Smith's story. And of course, they're still really big, but I didn't realize that. And people in Ireland are very religious. And so this was like already something really new to me. And they loved talking about religion. So we could always have these really great discussions. And like, I was so convinced, I was so sure just shows, I do think that going on a mission really convinces yourself the most, you know, because you're constantly saying how much you know that this is true, etc., that it kind of reinforces that in your head. And
we kind of know that the more that's the effect of the mission, because we know now in 2019 that proselyting is losing its effectiveness, that the missionary efforts by and large are really not doing much to increase the growth of the church other than in these developed countries. But the church keeps investing in it because it's the way to lock the members in. You get them on missions early, as young as possible, and then get them married. And the church knows that's the best way to secure their membership for hopefully a lifetime.
Right. Well, it worked for me for a long time.
Yeah.
Like I was telling one guy, you know, I know you will find nothing wrong with this church. I mean, if you find anything, let me know and I will leave it. But I was so convinced there's like nothing wrong. So, yeah, my first zone leader I had, he, I remember him telling me one day we talked about polygamy again, and he was telling me, well, you don't really believe in this. You need to go home and get a testimony of it. And he actually gave me like the challenge to go home, read Doctrine and Covenants 132, pray about it, and get a testimony of polygamy.
Yeah.
So I went home, I read 132 and did not get a testimony.
Oh.
I came back and I said, well, this doesn't convince me, you know, because not everybody has it. It seems to be just for a few. And if it were for everybody, Adam would have had several wives and not just Eve, you know. And plus in the Book of Mormon times, there was no polygamy. And see, you know, to me, that was the end of it. It's not an eternal principle. And it was funny because I just stopped believing in it. You know, I mean, I never really believed in it, but I didn't even, I know for me, I kind of had squared it away that way. Yeah, so, and even on, I love being a missionary, and I try to be like, of course, again, a super good missionary. And like, I didn't like this idea that the sister missionaries somehow were less. You know, like there seemed to be like some sister missionaries that felt like, oh, we don't have to work as hard as the men, you know, because we are women. And I would be like, what? What's this? You know, and so I got this reputation that I was really hardworking. And we had then a new mission president. He was a young man, well, in his 40s, and he had been a businessman. And he brought sort of this business attitude to the mission. And he did something that he called the rod of iron. And that meant you had to have so many first discussions and so many, I forgot all the things that you had to do. And then 2 baptisms, and then you became rod of iron. And of course, you know.
It was like a label or a title that you could get as
exactly. And he even had a scarf or a pin for it. And of course, I was among the first to get this. And I'm a bit ashamed of this now because, you know, it's like I totally bought into this ambition, and I would like teach first discussions on the doorstep. You know, it was just about having enough first discussions. And I lost a bit the spirit of it, you know, in this ambition to be just as good as the elders, you know. And like there would be sometimes, you know, you would hear stuff like, I would say, I would like to be a district leader or a zone leader. And then, you know, somebody would say,
one of those troublemaking, budding feminist sister missionaries. I guess. And the patriarchal elders were just super annoyed with you, how you always had to fight for female equality. What a drag.
Exactly. And they would tell me, I would never take orders from a sister. And there were those who would say, you know, why aren't you at home and have children? Like my sister is your age and she already has 3 children, you know, and that was supposed to be some kind of an ideal. And of course, you know, I somehow had failed because I hadn't found a husband. So I started saying that I had so many proposals that I couldn't decide, you know, so I went on a mission to avoid all of them. But yeah, so it's like, but I generally, I really love my mission. And I did have, several baptisms, and I made some really good friends, and two of which might be listening at some point. So shout out to Vaughn and shout out to Juha.
Oh, Juha was on your mission in Ireland.
Yes, he was my district leader and my zone leader.
Juha is another one of my favorite Mormons. He's from Finland, right?
Yes, he is.
Yeah,
and Vaughn was companions with Juha. And
right.
so, yeah, they're really great people. And other people that I met there, that just have also become lifelong friends. So.
Hey, are you able to do a Irish accent? Are you able to speak with an Irish accent?
Oh my gosh, no.
No?
I could right after my mission, and I said stuff like washing up liquid and jumper and stuff like that, but I have lost it. I can do one sentence in Irish if you want.
All right, go for it. What is that?
If anyone understands Gaelic, I probably totally butchered it. But it's supposed to mean the man who went abroad to sell shoes.
Okay.
A very useful sentence. Took me forever to learn it, but I never forgot it again. Yeah, Irish was not really spoken,
No, I just mean the Irish accent in English.
Yes, I know. And I can only still say a wee bit. No, and plus I was in many different areas and they're all different. So like Limerick has a different accent than Bangor or Dublin or whatever.
Got it. Okay.
But a great mission. I loved it.
That's so great. Yeah, I bet you were a great missionary. I bet you were insufferable. I bet for the sister missionaries who wanted to be slackers, I bet you were insufferable.
That's true. Well, one companion that I had, she said, well, I heard you were like a working horse. I said, well, that's maybe a bit of an exaggeration. But I did work hard. But at the same time, I was never one of those people that had to keep every and last rule, because I felt it's much more important to keep the higher law. So of course I was keeping the rules when I felt like they made sense, but for example, if we were teaching somebody and it was a really good conversation, I wouldn't say, well, it's 9:30, we need to leave, or something like this, or like one time somebody rang at our doorbell practically in the middle of the night, and it was a woman and she was suicidal. It was a person we had taught, and she wanted to kill herself that night, and she was like half drunk, and there was no way we would let her go away, so we let her come in and we let her stay in our house, and finally she slept there, and when we were going out in the morning she was still sleeping, and when we came back she had stolen half of our stuff. But but I didn't feel bad about it at all, because I felt like we had helped her at this point. That was much more important. And in fact, she had just stolen some of our dresses. So we went by her place and we brought her some other things as well. We said, oh, you forgot these things. And we brought her a coat, a really nice coat, and some other things. And
so you're willing to put the spirit of the law over the letter of the law.
Yes. And I've always felt that that's just what Jesus taught. I never understood those people that thought, if you keep every last rule in the white book, that's when you will have success. I think that makes no sense.
And you also write in your outline that you were a Bruce R. McConkie Mormon. In 2019, I'm a little bit torn, because on the one hand, so many of his teachings were awful. I'm glad he's kind of disappeared from Mormon discourse. But on the other hand, that was the missionary Mormon identity in the 1980s. It was Bruce R. McConkie.
I know. And now we realize,
stuff, right?
Now we realized he was false. Did you ever hear that talk of his, where he does that? The 7 deadly heresies.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. In fact, we had some missionaries in our mission that could really imitate him fantastically. I can't do it as well, but some really could. And we finally got the direction from the mission president not to imitate Bruce R. McConkie anymore. Yeah, but my father, I didn't realize it at the time, of course. I just thought it was the gospel. But I now realize, looking back, that my father, he had Mormon stories, he had read it, and that
Mormon
was
doctrine, not Mormon.
Yeah, Mormon doctrine. Mormon doctrine. Oh, I'm sorry.
I love it.
That was a Freudian slip. No, Mormon doctrine, of course, yeah. And he had internalized this, and he was teaching blood atonement to me, you know, and I didn't realize that that's what it was. I think he even believed in, I don't even know if that's in Mormon doctrine, but I think he even believed in the Adam God theory. And he was teaching me stuff about, you know, Black people being descendants of or being from that 1/3 in heaven that was undecided. You know, horrible stuff when I think about it now. But that's what he taught me. I thought that that's what the doctrine was.
That's the gospel. It's the doctrine.
Yeah.
And doctrine mattered back then.
Yes,
nowadays in 2019, other than like God lives, Jesus is the Christ, the atonement, priesthood, and authority, there isn't much doctrine that seems to matter.
Exactly. And, you know, somebody that grew up with doctrine still, that is just really bothered by this. To me, you can't just change it and then say, well, it was always like this. But yeah, so yeah, I think I probably also had a kind of a black and white view of the gospel very much. You know, that's how it was taught. It was either true or not true, you know, like it was like very black and white.
Yep, we came by it honestly.
Yes. Yes. And so even if you didn't like it, that's just how the truth was, you know. I mean, I didn't like the things about Black people, but, you know, that's how it was. Well, at least that's what I thought, you know.
All right. So should we talk about BYU?
Sure.
Anything else about your mission? Anything else about your mission you want to mention?
No, I think.
You served 1.5 years, right? 1.5.
Yes. And I extended, and I wanted to extend even more. I had a really hard time going home. I liked it so much. I felt like it was the most meaningful thing I had ever done. That's really how I felt about it. And yeah, and I don't regret my mission. It was a really good experience. And so, yeah, I came home and I decided on my mission that I would go to BYU. And and I was able, one of my companions, she was able to be my sort of my donor. You kind of need somebody that gives you financial backing to be able to go.
And I didn't know that. Well, what do you mean? It was just expensive?
Well, in case I would get impoverished or something, I had to have somebody that was like a sponsor or something. I don't know the exact word anymore for it. Plus, I had to pass a test, an English test. And I passed that, and yeah, I went like shortly after. So I came home in the summer of 87, 88, maybe? No, 87. So it was actually before that, 86.
So we started at BYU the same semester.
Yes, we must have. So in January I started.
Okay, so
a little bit later.
January of 87 or January of 88?
88, I think. 88.
Okay. Were you in the dorms?
I was at first in something that I forgot what it was called. And then right after from my second semester on, I was in the German house. I was the head resident of the German house.
I remember the German house.
Yes. And of course, that was a great thing for me because I could live for free and I could eat for free.
Oh, you were an RA. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, because I was the head resident. I just had to speak German, which was easy for me. And so, yeah, that was...
You haven't said this. What languages do you speak? You haven't told our listeners this.
Ah, okay. Well, my native language is Swiss German and German. And
those are slightly different.
They're slightly different.
Yeah.
They're apparently as different as Spanish and Portuguese, they say.
Yeah, so that's quite
different. But they're related. Yeah. Okay. But all Swiss speak both. You know, because we function that way. All official things are in German and unofficial things are in Swiss German. And so, and then French and English and Spanish.
That's a lot.
But Spanish I learned later. I started at BYU and I learned later. So at this point I didn't speak it yet.
Okay.
So yeah. So then now I kind of lost my train of thought.
You're about to meet Bill, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
You mentioned that your bishop wanted you to stay in Switzerland. Did you tell that story?
Yes, exactly. I was going to tell that story. Yes. When I decided to go to BYU, I went to my bishop, which was a different bishop than the one before. And I asked him to give me, to sign me the code of honor. And he told me, well, the brethren are telling us to stay in the countries where we're born. You're not supposed to go there. And then I said to him, are you going to date me? And he had 5 children, of course, was married. And he said, oh, if you have enough faith, you'll find somebody. I said, I know everybody in this state. And of all those guys, I like exactly 2 guys, and that's it. I'm not going through another non-Mormon. And so I just told him, if God doesn't tell me as well that I'm supposed to stay here, I'm going to go.
That is so cool. You had that level of autonomy and presence and confidence that you weren't going to let some missionary tell you that you were supposed to marry him. You weren't going to let some bishop tell you. That's a real remarkable part about your story, is that in spite of you being embedded in this oppressive patriarchy, you had this confidence or strength or assurance to just discard any of that garbage, patriarchal garbage that didn't seem right to you.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have that yet at 19, or I would have gone with my boyfriend, but to Spain. But I did learn that. I think I learned it from that experience because I regretted it so much. And I thought, had I just done what I wanted to do, no matter what the outcome, at least it would have been my fault, or my decision. And I started to learn that you need to be accountable for your own things. You can't defer it out to someone else and say, oh, well, he told me not to do this. And then I'm just angry at him. But I still had to learn that more. I mean, there were still other times when I didn't do that so well. But this time I did. And I did actually go back through England to see if I should marry that guy that had asked me to marry him. And we were together, and we actually even got engaged. Because when I was with him, he was telling me again how he knew that God wanted me to marry him and stuff. And while I was with him, it felt okay. But as soon as I was away and when I was over at BYU, I realized, no, I don't want to marry that guy. There were several reasons why. One of them was that, for example, he just lied to his mom. We would be out in town. He was supposed to call her, and then he forgot. And when we came home, he just said, oh, I tried to call you, but I couldn't find a telephone booth. And, that kind of thing showed me a lack of character. And so anyway, so then, in my very first week at BYU, I met Bill. And actually, one of my companions from the mission, she had a birthday, and she's a twin. And her birthday is the 28th of January. And so is Bill's. And Bill is also a twin. They're both identical twins, and they have the same day as a birthday. And so she invited Bill and his twin brother. And she knew Bill from working in the baptistry in the temple. So he came, and we started talking, and we hit it off right away. So I met him my very first week. And so I was impressed because he knew so much about Europe. He could speak German, and he could speak Spanish. He was studying European studies. And, I had sort of this stereotype or this cliche that most Americans know nothing about Europe. And here was a guy that was very knowledgeable, and so that really impressed me. And he was going to the temple every week. That impressed me. He was very reliable. He was intelligent. He had all these things, and he came from this really great family, and that was something that was really important to me. Because I had this idea, because my family is that I need to marry a guy with a great family. you know, so that we know together how to have a good family. It was like one of the things I had come up with. So yeah, so I thought, this is the guy I'm going to marry. And yeah, and I really loved BYU. I felt like for the first time I wasn't an outsider. At first I felt that, but then I realized I was an outsider again because I was Swiss, and you know, I wasn't an American, and plus a lot of the views at BYU that people held were strange to me anyway, and I felt an outsider in a different way. Yeah, like for example, some of the views they had just in general were strange to me, like wanting to make a lot of money, whereas I was interested in getting a good education, or just wanting to get married. And you know, some of the views that were very typical, I guess, Mormon culture in Utah were different to me.
This would have been right, you know, right at the end of Ronald Reagan's term. This would have been right as George Bush the first was becoming president. And yeah, there was a lot. And the Soviet, you know, the Soviet Union had fallen, the Berlin Wall had come down, or at least would soon thereafter. The Cold War was kind of ending. And so there was a lot of patriotism and a lot of Mormon patriotism. And there still is, of course, but it was very heavy then.
Yeah. I mean, one of the small things that to me were really strange is when people would pray for moisture in church. You know?
Yeah, they still do that. In Cache Valley, they still pray for moisture.
For a Swiss, that's extremely strange because we have so much rain, you know, we would pray for sun, you know, which nobody did. But, you know, it's like, that was really strange.
They still do that in Cache Valley in 2009.
Oh, yeah. I guess it makes sense in Utah, but it's just for us, for me, it was really strange. But I also was, all of a sudden, I was confronted with this American exceptionalism. You know, it was like, you know, they would talk about the Independence War, no, the Revolutionary War. And I thought, what's that? To me, that was the French Revolution. You know, I mean, the revolution was the French Revolution. And I never thought of the independence of America as the Revolutionary War. You know, like things like that I would encounter in classes. Or, you know, like that this was Zion, that this was the Lord's university, you know, that this was the promised land. And I had to be so grateful to be there. And I started to like resent that a little bit. And sometimes I would make critical comments and then people would get really upset with me. I didn't have the right, you know, to say something critical because it wasn't my country. I kind of get that, but still it was something I wasn't used to. And then once we were married, you know, there were like also these views that now, you know, I had to ask my husband for things. And when I had a child, it was like, now I should be actually at home with this child and I shouldn't be studying. President Benson had said the women belong in the home. I was told in one class by a guy.
Yeah, he gave a really famous general conference talk where he just kind of laid that down over the pulpit.
Right.
And said a woman's place is in the home.
Right. And I was told in classes.
It really swept through BYU as kind of a bold and for liberals, a controversial statement.
Yeah. And, you know, but I knew the perfect comeback to that guy. This was like in a class and he said that to me. And I said, well, do you believe in personal revelation? He said, yes. And I said, well, I had the revelation. I should go and finish my degree. Of course, it wasn't really true, but but it was like a good comeback. It shut him up, you know. But it's like, it made me feel weird. And I did feel guilty for going to school. You know, I did feel guilty. I did, even though I continued with it, I did think maybe that's wrong. You know, and as Bill's siblings started to get married and these women stayed at home, you know, I thought maybe there's something wrong with me because I did not enjoy just being at home. I love my kids, you know, but I did not enjoy being just at home. I had all these other interests and I just pursued them. And I thought maybe that's wrong of me, you know, maybe that's bad. But I continued, you know, and I thought, why has God given me these wishes to do other things if he then thinks it's wrong? So this was like a conflict that went on for many years, actually.
I love your spiritual independence.
Yeah, but it came at a cost, you know. Then I felt always conflicted about it. And yeah, when we first got married, we lived in Wymount Terrace. I don't know if you know this. It's like,
oh yeah, that was the married student housing, basically.
Exactly. And I remember our ward had like 100% visiting teaching, 100% home teaching. They came every month, but I've never been as lonely in my entire church time ever. You know, it's like we had just gotten married. All our friends were still unmarried. I had no family there. Bill had no family because they lived in Connecticut. And so we were by ourselves, and we would have needed friends, but nobody befriended us. And then, you know, I decided when the visiting teachers came, I would tell them that I was really lonely. And Bill actually had mono as well, just right after we got married. So I was really lonely because he was always sleeping, you know, when he wasn't doing his stuff. And so I thought, I'm going to tell these visiting teachers. And they came, and they both had a child already, these two women. And they sat there and they talked for 40 minutes about their deliveries. I wasn't even pregnant. And, you know, it scared me about ever having children. And I didn't dare saying anything. And after 40 minutes, just as they were going out under the, you know, the door, they saying, is there anything we can do for you? And I said, not anymore. And so, yeah, so that kind of was, for me, like they checked off something on a box, but they didn't really care.
Yeah, and that's kind of weird. You think the loneliest you could ever be, for example, is when you live alone. But I've talked to many married couples who feel the most alone they've ever felt in a loveless marriage, right?
Right.
And loneliness is not just being alone. It's sort of how you feel when you're around people in terms of what you expect or hope from those relationships versus what they might fail to deliver. And I think the loneliest sometimes people feel are when they're surrounded by people, but nobody cares or nobody seems to care.
Right. Well, plus, you know, Bill and I had a really hard time. We fought all the time in our first year. You know, it was like, I think a lot of these things from my dysfunctional family came up at that time. You know, it was like, this guy doesn't really want to stay with me for sure, you know, and all this stuff came out in me just being very, very contrary in everything. And I picked a fight at everything. And then Bill got sick. And, you know, it was like all these different factors. We then decided to go to Switzerland for a year, and that helped a lot. I was with my family, you know, I had my friends again, and Bill got to see my country. And so we kind of found, you know, our footing then. And when we went, we stayed 1 year in Switzerland, then went back to BYU to get our degrees. And at that time, after I said, I don't want to move into Wymount Terrace anymore. So we moved into Orem, into a regular ward. And that was a lot better. And so I actually enjoyed that. It was like a Geneva something ward, but a lot of, you know, workers people, but really nice people. And you had children and you had, you know, old people. I mean, the whole spectrum. And I like that a lot better than just all in the same time of life. You know, I didn't enjoy that very much.
Got it. Okay.
So then we got our degrees in 94, both got a master's. And at this point,
and by the way, you were oblivious to the September 6th, Joanna Brooks, you know, student review, all the liberal, you know, marching for abortion rights, marching for, you know, assaults of women, you know, take back the night, all that. And student
I know, it's terrible.
Newspaper. You missed all that.
I did, and I feel terrible. I read Martha Stewart's book years later, and everything she describes also, she was like on the faculty, I think, what was going on at the time. And I thought, how could I be completely oblivious to that stuff? and it's like, maybe I got a little tiny bit like abortion and stuff we would discuss, but I just had my own views about it, thinking, that a person should have a choice, that kind of thing. But I think Bill's family is relatively strongly Republican and conservative. And I came into this family and I took over some of those views at first. And except for like one time at a family gathering, I told everyone that I was a Democrat, and it wasn't even true.
Uh-oh.
I wasn't even an American citizen.
Them's fighting words.
Yeah, I just wanted to see the reaction, and there was like a dead silence. And then one of Bill's brothers said, "Well, I guess we can have one of those in the family." And so that was kind of then I was intrigued, but at that time, it's like what you said, I think earlier. I mean, I was on a mission, I had children, I was studying. I didn't even have time to really think about other things, so I wasn't very politically interested or engaged in any of these things because I was so busy. And yeah, I feel bad now that all of this passed by me completely. The only thing I did have was a class with you, Nibley. And
nice. How was that?
So strange. I was like, I was expecting this great thing. I was really looking forward to it. I thought I got in, and then I never knew what he was talking about. It was really strange.
It was just kind of gobbledygook, right?
It really was. And I was
and everybody was like, "Whoa, he's so brilliant. We can't understand a word he's saying."
That's exactly what it was like. And then there was only one exam. And the exam question I will never forget was, why should I fear and tremble?
Yeah.
That was the exam question. I thought, because of this exam, Yeah, it was really strange. I had no idea what he was talking about. I didn't learn anything in that class, except for maybe, that Hugh Nibley wasn't as great as I had thought. But yeah, it was strange. So all of that, anyway, that was going on completely passed by me. Didn't realize any of it. Yeah, and then we went back to Switzerland in 1994, and that was actually kind of, we had that 1 year when we had lived in Switzerland, we had said we're going to go get our degrees and then come and live in Switzerland. But the longer we lived in America, the more I liked it there. And now I actually was comfortable, and I had gotten my master's, and I wanted to get a doctorate, and I was.
Did you have career ambitions, and if so, what were they?
Yeah, I wanted to become a university professor. I wanted to get a doctorate in German literature and then work at a university. That really was my ambition, and I knew if we go back to Switzerland, that won't work. And. But Bill just felt like that's what we should do. And then I remember we went to the temple and I prayed, and I felt like I got the answer, follow your husband.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. But I was very upset. I was upset about it. I was upset for 2 years because it's like my career had come to a screeching halt. We came to Switzerland. I did go to university here to find out if I could do a doctoral program here. They told me I was too old. I was 34. And they said, you are already too old. You should already have a PhD by now, and you should be working on your second PhD. I don't know what that's called in English. Habilitation in German. And I said, well, that's not possible if you have children. And they said, well, that's true. So I guess it's a bit, it discriminates women. They admitted it. At least women that wanted to have children or a family. So then I had to start working for this private school with kids that were very difficult. It was a very difficult school. I was completely overqualified for this job. I started to teach English, at a lower level. And yeah, I did not enjoy it, and I got kind of depressed because I felt I had always wanted to have a really good career. I guess it was maybe also coming out of this family where nobody had amounted to anything, so to speak, how I felt. And I wanted to have a degree. And I mean, I did, but I wanted to have a degree that was good for something. And yeah, but finally, you know, I kind of adapted. I had 2 more children, and we had a big house, you know, and I was just really busy with all that. I never quit working. But at this point, I had to work, because otherwise we couldn't, we didn't have enough money. But I always felt guilty, you know, and I really kept hounding Bill, the poor man, to find a job where he would earn more so that I could be at home like I was supposed to be.
Right.
But he always told me you wouldn't be happy. And he was right.
Oh.
But I thought I needed to do that. I thought it would be the righteous thing, you know, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you ended up having these dreams of, you know, as a bright, capable, talented, educated woman, you had all this potential and capability, and you got drawn in. I don't want to say sucked into, but you got drawn into the Mormon dream.
Yeah. That
may have not been what you would have chosen if you could have had the full range of choices available.
Yeah. I don't think so. I love my kids, you know, and I love having kids, I have to say. But I might not have had as many, you know. Now, of course, I wouldn't give any of them naturally. But it's just, I was always like more of a intellectual, you know. I think I would have really enjoyed university life.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I had to give that up, you know, because here in Switzerland, you could only be a full-time career person, you know, and in that sense, America is more progressive, where a woman can actually work and be at home. And here they still have this, either you are at home with your children or you have a career. Only now it's changing in the last maybe 10 years or so.
Got it.
So even at my school, I was the only one for a long time, me and one other, that had children. You know, the other women didn't have any. Yeah, and then of course we were in a small branch, you know. Well, first we were in the Bern ward, but which was also small, and then we got sent to Thun, and it was a small branch, and of course when it's a small branch you have to do a lot, you know. So I was like primary president for years and Relief Society president, and Bill then became the branch president. And he already had like a job that was very, very demanding. He was working in IT. And so I think it was just, and Bill is a very conscientious person, a very, you know, person that really takes his responsibilities seriously. So he started to develop sleeping problems, and he got more and more stressed. And then that was stressing me. And then that, you know, was a stress on our relationship. And so I feel like we were in this hamster wheel of just always going. And I think I kept trying to prove that I was worth something, that I was that we had this good Mormon family, that we were these good people. And Bill just had a really strong sense of duty. And so, yeah, I think our marriage became very stressed under all this.
It's got to be hard. Tell me what it's like, because on the one hand, I would think, oh, you're raised in Switzerland. You want to stay in Switzerland because that's where your family is. That's where you're most comfortable. That's your background, your heritage, your culture. So on the one hand, I would think that, but then on the other hand, I think, oh my gosh, you know, the States, and it can be exciting, and that's where the church is. But there's also, you know, in some ways in the 80s, America was viewed as a world leader. I think it's fallen in status a little bit since then. And I don't know if the socioeconomic conditions were better or worse, or the employment opportunities. I just imagine there might be a lot of mixed feelings there about having lived in the United States for so many years and then you're plopped back in Barron, which is a beautiful, charming town.
Absolutely, yeah.
But
yeah,
but it's also hard. You know, it's different than America. That's all I can say.
Yeah. And, you know, I had left for with my mission and then America from my early 20s, and we returned when I was 30. And so I hadn't actually been on my own or a grown-up in Switzerland.
Yeah.
So, and Bill, of course, hadn't. And, you know, this led to all sorts of problems. I didn't even know how a washer or dryer ran over here. I didn't know how to shop. I didn't know how to do insurance. And Bill didn't either. And he like relied on me doing all of this because I was the Swiss, you know, but I had no clue. And that was really hard. Whereas in America, I don't know, I had developed all this self-confidence in America because I was doing an education. I felt very comfortable. I had my own place, you know, I ran my own household. So I had like kind of gained my adulthood in America. And then coming to Switzerland was like being thrown back, you know, to an earlier time. And it was really, really hard. I struggled a lot with that. And everything was left to me because, you know, I spoke the language. I supposedly knew, but I didn't. We didn't even know how to drive here. You know, neither one of us would know the signs, and we would guess at what they meant. And plus, I had never driven with a stick. You know, we just had all of a sudden a car with a stick, and Bill showed it to me twice in a parking lot, and then off I went on the road. You know, you can imagine. I prayed very hard when we came to a red light on a hill, you know, because I couldn't start the car anymore. And, you know, lots of things like this made me feel like incompetent, and it made me feel like all the old insecurities I'd had, they all came back. And I really struggled with that. And on top of that, like my career ambitions completely stopped. And then I felt like, I think there was also the sense, I felt like it hadn't really been my choice. We hadn't made this choice together. Yeah. I just had to follow my husband. And so there was a certain resentment also. This time I did not stand up for myself, you know. And it seemed different when I was on my own. I could just say, okay, I go. I don't care if the bishop says something else. But when you're married, it's not as easy. Yeah. And what was hard for me, it was like, many times I said, let's reconsider going back to the States. And he never took that seriously. Mm-hmm. We never even, you know, looked at it seriously. It just kind of, I felt it was like looked at as if, oh, well, yeah, she's having one of her moments again about wanting to go back. It'll pass. And the thing is, eventually it did pass, you know. In a way, now I think it was a good thing we came. I really do.
Sure.
You know, I reconnected. I was here for my mom. My mom lived with us. My dad died shortly after we came back, and I got to be with him before he died. I reconnected with all these siblings that I mentioned at the very beginning. These two oldest brothers, older sisters from the former marriages that I never even knew. And these things wouldn't have happened had I stayed in the States.
Right.
So it's a good thing now, but it was very difficult at first. And also another thing is, while I was not, you know, engaged in any of these things that you mentioned earlier, BYU, we did have some really good intellectual friends. We had great discussions. I had some professors that like really opened up my mind, you know, postmodernism and stuff for the first time entered into my consciousness. You know, and I felt like something had been opened, and I was like learning all these new things. And now coming back here and being in a ward where people were more simple, were of a lower level of education. And yeah, we didn't have any intellectual friends anymore. And that's another thing I really, really missed.
Yeah, because in a small ward or branch like in Barron, you're just not going to necessarily get the diversity, the quantity, and the diversity of thought that you might get.
No. But, you know, especially later when we were in Thun, they may not have been, you know, great intellectual people, but they were really, really good people. And it felt with time, it felt like a family. So that, that also has to be said. But at first it was really hard after having had all these, academic friends.
I have to give a shout out to Martine. Martine is a dear friend of mine who grew up in Belgium, joined the church there, and then married a U.S. citizen. And Martine writes, yes, I go home to Belgium and there's so much I don't understand for the same reasons. I was never an adult there. Right. But I did learn to drive a stick shift in Utah, she says.
I might have eventually learned that. Who knows? I'm glad I know how to do that now. So, yes.
Yeah. Thanks for your comment, Martine. It's always great to have you join us.
Yes. I kind of know her through Facebook. So
she's great. You got to meet Martine.
Yes, I would like to. Next time you come, you have to come visit Switzerland.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So serving heavily in the church, Bill is branch president, then bishop. You've been serving as Relief Society president. Were you Young Women's president?
No, for some reason not.
Okay,
I was
but Relief Society presidency.
Yeah. We didn't have a lot of young women, so yeah.
And then lots of kids and the stresses and difficulties of marriage, which is tough for anyone. So
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we added one couple stresses that we added, and then one that happened that we didn't add. One was we got 2 foster children, not at the same time, one after the other, and a total of 6 years. And I don't know why we did this when we already had so much on our plates, but we did it probably also out of this sense of one should serve, one should do something important and good. And especially the first one was really, really hard. And at the end of this time, I almost had a nervous breakdown because it was so difficult. And there was for the first time a person that hated me. And yeah, that was really, really hard to bear.
Who hated you?
Yes, I think at the end she hated me. And not because I'd done anything bad, but somehow it had gone really bad. I had really tried to give her everything I could, but it wasn't how she wanted it. And then the mother of her boyfriend just kind of poisoned her mind against me. And yeah, I really think that was hate at the end. And then we had the second foster child, even though I said I will never do this again, but somebody talked us into it and said, this time you'll have a much easier experience. This one is so easy, it'll be like healing from the other. Well, it was easier in some ways. We're still in good contact, and she still feels like one of us. But she also had a lot of problems and difficulties, and so that was really, really difficult as well.
So what is a nervous breakdown kind of? What is that like? How almost having a nervous breakdown?
Yeah, the way I was is I would come into my home and I would immediately run after work, and I would immediately run to my room and lock myself in and not want to talk to anyone, not my children, not anyone, because I just couldn't bear this negativity that was in the house with her. And I would break out crying and everything, and I had nightmares, and it just was a terrible situation. And it continued for quite some time afterwards, because I blamed myself. I felt like I should have done it differently. I should have shown her more love, or even though I really, really tried. Now I look at it with more compassion. And the thing was also, she was put into our home even though she was 3 years older than our oldest child, and that's never a good idea. So I had no experience with teenagers, and she was 14 and a very difficult teenager, and my oldest was 11. And so later, when Liam, my oldest son, went through just normal teenage things like loud music or whatever, I would have this panic come up in me, thinking he was going to be like this girl, and I would start crying and stuff, and he would have to comfort me, say, Mom, I'm never going to become like her, don't worry. You know, and so with time, you know, I got over it, but it was very difficult, and it was kind of a kind of a trauma for me. It wasn't as bad with the second one, but she had a lot of problems in school and with lying and stealing and things like that, and she came from very difficult circumstances, and yeah, so that was also difficult.